The eviction notice had been taped to her door 17 days ago, but Alina Marsh hadn't left. She was still sitting in apartment 4B when the sheriff's deputy knocked, still sitting there when he explained she had 48 hours, still sitting there when the 48 hours passed. Now she was sitting in the third row of the Marion County Courthouse in Indianapolis, wearing the same cardigan she'd worn to her husband's funeral 11 years ago, and the landlord's attorney was asking the judge to hold her in contempt. Her name was on the docket as a squatter. 63 years in the same building, the same four walls, the same view of the parking lot where she'd watched her daughter learn to ride a bicycle, where she'd stood the morning the ambulance came for Richard, where she'd grown old without anyone noticing until the building sold and the new owners decided the old leases were inconvenient. The landlord's name was Desmond Keller, 34 years old. He'd purchased the Glenwood Apartments complex 8 months ago through an LLC registered in Delaware. He wasn't in the courtroom. He never came to the courtrooms. He had attorneys for that, 3 of them today, sitting at the plaintiff's table in suits that cost more than Alina's monthly Social Security check. The lead attorney was a woman named Patricia Vance, blonde, mid-40s, the kind of composed that comes from never having lost a case that mattered. She was explaining to Judge Harold Whitmore that Alina Marsh had been offered relocation assistance, that she'd been given ample time, that the building was scheduled for renovation, and every other tenant had already vacated, and this one elderly woman was holding up a $12 million development project. "Your Honor," Patricia said, "we've been more than patient." Alina didn't have an attorney. She tried to get one. Legal Aid of Indiana had a 6-month waiting list. The 2 private attorneys she'd called wanted retainers she couldn't afford. The law school clinic had taken her information and never called back, so she was representing herself, which meant she was standing alone at the defendant's table with a folder full of documents she didn't fully understand and a hearing aid that kept picking up static from the courtroom's aging electrical system. Judge Whitmore looked at her over his reading glasses. He was 61, 3 years from retirement, and he'd seen hundreds of eviction cases. They all looked the same after a while. Landlord files paperwork. Tenant falls behind or violates terms. Court orders removal. Sheriff enforces. Next case. "Mrs. Marsh," he said, "do you understand the motion before you?" "I understand they want me gone." "That's not what I asked." "I've lived there since 1961, Your Honor. My husband and I moved in the week after our wedding. We raised our daughter there. He died there. I was supposed to die there too." Patricia Vance shifted in her seat. "Your Honor, the defendant's personal history, while sympathetic, isn't legally relevant. The lease expired. The building owner has the right to." "I know the law, counselor." Judge Whitmore's voice carried the particular weariness of a man who'd spent 3 decades listening to attorneys explain things he already understood. "Mrs. Marsh, I'm going to ask you again. Do you have any legal basis for remaining in the property?" Alina opened her folder. Her hands were trembling. The pages were marked with sticky notes in different colors, a system her granddaughter had helped her create over the phone before the granddaughter stopped answering calls. There was a copy of her original lease from 1961, a letter from the previous building owner, a man named Samuel Okonkwo, who had promised in writing that she could stay as long as she needed, a stack of rent receipts going back decades, and a single document she'd found in a box in her closet 2 nights ago, the one she'd almost thrown away a dozen times, the one she hadn't even remembered existed until she'd started looking for reasons to stay alive. "I have this," she said, and handed the paper to the bailiff. Patricia Vance's face didn't change, but something in her posture did. The way a person stiffens when they realize the ground might not be as solid as they thought. The bailiff brought the document to Judge Whitmore. He studied it for almost a full minute without speaking. Then he looked up at Alina Marsh, and for the first time, she saw something in his expression that wasn't impatience. "Where did you get this?" "My husband, Richard. He was the building superintendent for 37 years. The original owner, Mr. Harriman, gave it to him in 1974. Patricia Vance was already on her feet. Your Honor, I'd like to see the document in question. I have no idea what the defendant is referring to, and I. Sit down, counselor. She sat. Judge Whitmore read the document again, slower this time. Then he removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose in the way men do when they're trying to decide whether to laugh or swear. Mrs. Marsh, he said, are you aware of what this is? Richard always said it was important. He said it meant we'd never have to leave. I didn't understand it at the time. I'm not sure I understand it now. It's a deed transfer, signed by Harold Harriman in 1974, granting Richard and Alina Marsh lifetime tenancy rights to apartment 4B, with an option to purchase at a fixed price of $12,000. The option was never exercised, but the lifetime tenancy clause appears to be legally binding. The courtroom was silent. Patricia Vance recovered first. Your Honor, that document is 50 years old. There's no way it's still enforceable. The building has changed ownership multiple times. My client purchased it free and clear of. Did your client conduct a title search before purchase? Of course. Then why wasn't this deed recorded? Patricia hesitated. That hesitation cost her. I'd have to consult with my client and review the transaction documents, but even if there was an oversight during the sale, that doesn't mean the current owner should be bound by. Counselor, I'm going to stop you right there. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. If this document is authentic and if it was properly executed, then your client may have purchased a building with an existing encumbrance that wasn't disclosed. That's a problem, not for Mrs. Marsh, for your client. We'd like to request a continuance to investigate the document's authenticity. Granted, 3 weeks, but Mrs. Marsh stays in the apartment until this is resolved. No further removal attempts. Patricia Vance's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Your Honor, my client has construction crews scheduled. There are contracts in place. Every day of delay costs. Then I suggest your client's attorneys work quickly. The hearing ended. Alina Marsh gathered her papers and walked out of the courtroom on legs that barely felt like her own. She'd won something. She wasn't sure what, but for the first time in months, she wasn't being told to leave. She didn't notice the man watching her from the back row. His name was Marcus Shelby. He was 58 years old, and until 6 months ago, he'd been an investigator for the Indiana Attorney General's office. Retired now, technically. But retirement didn't sit well with a man who'd spent 30 years pulling threads until entire cases unraveled. He'd come to the courthouse for an unrelated matter, a deposition in a fraud case he was consulting on. But he ducked into Judge Whitmore's courtroom to kill time, and now he was watching Alina Marsh walk toward the elevator with a folder that had just changed the entire shape of her case. He'd seen that document, just a glimpse when the bailiff carried it to the judge, but he'd recognized the letterhead. Harriman Properties, Inc. A name he hadn't heard in decades. A name that had come up exactly once during the strangest case of his career. A case that had never been solved, never been closed, never been explained. Marcus Shelby followed Alina Marsh to the parking garage. She was standing by an ancient Toyota Camry, fumbling with her keys. Her hands were shaking worse now than they had been in the courtroom. The adrenaline was wearing off. She looked small and fragile and completely unaware that she'd just stumbled into something much bigger than an eviction dispute. Mrs. Marsh. She startled, clutching her folder to her chest. Who are you? My name's Marcus Shelby. I'm not here to cause you trouble. I was in the courtroom. I saw what happened. Are you a reporter? No, ma'am, I'm retired. Used to work for the state. I investigate things, or I did. I don't need an investigator. I need to go home. I understand. But that document you showed the judge, The deed from Harold Harriman. I need to ask you something about it. Just one question. And then I'll leave you alone." Alina studied his face. She'd learned to read people over 63 years. This man had kind eyes, but there was something restless behind them, something hungry. "What's your question?" "Did your husband ever tell you how he got that deed? The real story?" "He worked for Mr. Harriman. He was loyal. Mr. Harriman wanted to thank him." "That's what he told you?" "That's what happened." Marcus shook his head slowly. "Mrs. Marsh, Harold Harriman died in 1979. He was found in his office at the Glenwood Apartments. Heart attack, according to the coroner. But there was always talk, rumors. Some people thought he was killed." "Killed by who?" "That's what I spent 3 years trying to figure out. I was young then, just a junior investigator, but I pulled the file a dozen times over my career. The case was never officially reopened because there was never enough evidence to challenge the coroner's ruling. But I always wondered. And there was one detail that never made sense to me. One thing that didn't fit." Alina's face had gone pale. "What detail?" "The night Harold Harriman died, someone removed a box of documents from his office. Building records, ownership papers, deeds. The person who removed them was never identified, but your husband was the building superintendent. He would have had a key." "Richard would never." "I'm not accusing him of anything. He's been gone for years. Whatever happened, it happened a long time ago. But that document you're holding, the one that just saved you from eviction, it might be connected to something that's been buried for almost 50 years. And if it is, then the people trying to take your home aren't going to stop just because a judge told them to wait 3 weeks. They're going to come after you harder, and they're going to start asking questions about your husband. Questions you might not want answered." Alina Marsh looked down at the folder in her hands. For a moment, Marcus thought she might cry. Instead, she opened the passenger door of her Camry and placed the folder carefully on the seat. "Mr. Shelby," she said, "my husband was a good man. He worked hard. He loved his family. If he kept secrets from me, he had his reasons. I don't need to know what they were. I just need to stay in my home." "What if staying in your home means finding out the truth?" "Then I'll find it out. But not because you asked me to, because I have to." She got in the car and drove away. Marcus stood in the parking garage for a long time after she left, thinking about a dead man in an office and a box of missing documents and a lifetime deed that had just surfaced like a body rising to the top of a lake. 3 weeks wasn't much time, but it was enough. Desmond Keller got the call from Patricia Vance at 6:47 p.m. while he was having dinner at a restaurant in Chicago where the appetizers cost more than most people's car payments. He listened without interrupting. Then he told her to handle it and hung up. Desmond Keller didn't get angry. Anger was inefficient. But he did get focused, and when he got focused, problems tended to disappear. He'd purchased the Glenwood Apartments for $2.3 million. The renovation budget was another $8. The projected return once the building was converted to luxury condos was $26 million. The math was simple. The margins were excellent. The only variable was time. Every month of delay cost money. Carrying costs, construction crews standby fees, interest on the development loans. The old woman in 4B was costing him roughly $40,000 a week just by existing. He called a different number. "I need background on someone," he said. "Alina Marsh, Indianapolis, everything you can find. And there's a document I need authenticated or discredited, preferably discredited." The voice on the other end asked how quickly. "Yesterday." The voice said it would be done. Desmond finished his dinner and thought about the strange economics of old women who refused to die in convenient locations. He'd dealt with holdouts before. In Cleveland, in St. Louis, in a dozen small towns where poor people clung to decaying buildings like shipwreck survivors clinging to driftwood. They always gave up eventually. It was just a matter of finding the right pressure point. Everyone had a pressure point. Elinor Marsh arrived home to find her apartment door unlocked. She knew she'd locked it. She always locked it. 63 years of living alone had made her meticulous about locks and lights and the small rituals of safety. Someone had been inside. Nothing was missing as far as she could tell, but things had been moved. Drawers opened and closed, papers shuffled. The box in her closet, the one where she'd found the deed, was still there, but the contents were disordered in ways she recognized. Someone was looking for something. She called the police. A tired officer took her statement and told her there was no sign of forced entry, which meant it was probably a maintenance issue. Had she talked to her landlord? She explained that her landlord was trying to evict her. The officer's expression shifted from boredom to discomfort. He said he'd file a report. She knew it would go nowhere. That night she didn't sleep. She sat in the dark with the box in her lap, going through every piece of paper Richard had saved. Bank statements from the 70s, photographs of the building when it was new, letters from tenants who'd moved away decades ago. And at the bottom, something she'd never seen before, a small leather notebook, the kind men used to carry in their coat pockets. Richard's handwriting filled the pages. It wasn't a diary exactly, more like a record, dates, names, observations. Some of it made sense, maintenance schedules, tenant complaints, notes about the boiler. But scattered among the mundane entries were passages that read like coded confessions. March 14, 1974. H asked me to move the boxes, said it was for safekeeping. I didn't ask why, should have asked why. June 3, 1974. Deed signed today. H said it was payment for loyalty, felt more like payment for silence. November 17, 1979. H is dead. Police came asking questions. I said nothing. What could I say? The truth would destroy everything. December 2, 1979. Someone else knows. Someone was watching. Have to protect Elinor. Have to protect everything we built. Elinor read the entries 3 times. Each time she understood less. Who was watching? What was Richard protecting her from? And what had happened in that office the night Harold Harriman died? The next morning she called the courthouse and asked for Marcus Shelby. They told her he didn't work there anymore. She described him, the kind eyes, the restless hunger, and someone said she might be talking about the retired investigator who sometimes consulted on cases. They gave her a phone number. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Shelby," she said, "I found something. I think you need to see it." They met at a diner near the courthouse. Neutral ground. Elinor brought the notebook. Marcus brought a file folder of his own, yellowed documents from a case that had never been closed. "Your husband was there the night Harriman died," Marcus said, after reading the relevant entries. "He may have been the last person to see him alive." "That doesn't mean he killed him." "No, but it means he knew something, and whatever he knew scared him enough to keep silent for 40 years. He was protecting me." "Probably, but protecting you from what?" Elinor shook her head. "I don't know. I spent 47 years married to that man. I thought I knew everything about him. Now I'm reading his words and I feel like I'm meeting a stranger." Marcus pulled a photograph from his file. Black and white. 2 men standing in front of the Glenwood Apartments, early 1970s. One was Harold Harriman. She recognized him from the portraits that used to hang in the lobby. The other was a younger man in a work shirt. "Recognize him?" Elinor's breath caught. "That's Richard. I found this in the case file. Someone had identified your husband as a potential witness, but he was never formally interviewed. The investigation was closed before anyone could follow up." "Why?" "Politics, pressure. I was never sure, but someone wanted that case buried and they had enough pull to make it happen." "Who?" Marcus hesitated. Then he pulled another document from his file. This one was a deed, similar to the one Alina had found, but different. It transferred ownership of the Glenwood apartments from Harold Harriman to a trust. The trust was administered by a law firm. The law firm's name was Vance and Associates. Alina stared at the document. Patricia Vance, the attorney who's trying to evict me. Her father, William Vance. He died in 2008, but he was Harold Harriman's personal attorney for 20 years. He handled all of Harriman's property transactions, including the sale that eventually led to your building ending up in Desmond Keller's hands. Are you saying the attorneys knew about the deed, my deed? I'm saying they should have known. That deed was recorded somewhere. It should have shown up in any competent title search. The fact that it didn't, or that someone claimed it didn't, raises questions. What kind of questions? The kind that could unravel a $50 million development project. The kind that could expose fraud. The kind that could destroy careers. Alina sat back in the booth. The diner noise, clinking plates, murmured conversations, the sizzle of the grill, seemed very far away. Mr. Shelby, I'm 79 years old. I don't have $50 million. I don't have a law degree. I don't have anything except a dead husband's secrets and a piece of paper that says I can stay in my home. How am I supposed to fight people who have all those things? You're not supposed to fight them. You're supposed to let them fight each other. That's how you win. I don't understand. Marcus leaned forward. Patricia Vance didn't know about your deed. I'm sure of it. Her reaction in that courtroom, she was blindsided. That means either her father buried it before he died, or someone in the chain of title hid it during one of the subsequent sales. Either way, she's not the only attorney involved in this mess. There are others. And when powerful people realize they've been exposed, they don't circle the wagons. They start looking for someone to blame. You want me to expose them? I want you to survive long enough for the truth to come out. After that, the system will do the rest. Courts are slow, but they're not stupid. Judges don't like being lied to. And what I'm seeing here, this isn't just an eviction case anymore. This is fraud, conspiracy, maybe worse. Worse. Your husband thought someone was watching him. He thought he needed to protect you. He was afraid of something, Mrs. Marsh. Afraid enough to stay silent about a man's death for 4 decades. People don't do that unless the threat is real. Alina thought about her apartment, the unlocked door, the rifled drawers. The threat was still real. 3 days later, Patricia Vance requested an emergency meeting with her client. She flew to Chicago on Desmond Keller's private jet, which should have been a perk of the job but instead felt like a summons. The meeting was in his office, 47 floors above the city, with windows that made the world below look small and insignificant. The deed is authentic, she said. We had it analyzed by 3 separate experts. The paper is consistent with 1974. The signatures match verified samples. The notary seal is legitimate. There's no way to discredit it. Desmond Keller was standing at the window looking out at the lake. He didn't turn around. Then find another way. There is no other way. The lifetime tenancy clause is binding. Mrs. Marsh has a legal right to remain in that apartment until she dies. We could offer her a settlement, a substantial one, but based on her behavior so far, I don't think she's motivated by money. Everyone is motivated by money. Not everyone. Some people are motivated by spite, or grief, or the simple desire to not be pushed around. Then push harder. Patricia hesitated. This was the part of her job she'd always hated, the moment when a client's demands crossed from aggressive into something darker. Desmond, I need to be careful how I phrase this. There are limits to what I can do as your attorney. Certain actions could expose both of us to. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. You're asking me to make an old woman's life miserable enough that she gives up. That might not be illegal, but it's business. He turned around. His face was perfectly calm. Patricia, your firm has represented my interests for 9 years. You've made a great deal of money doing so. You've also inherited certain complications from your father's practice, things he didn't tell you about, things that could become problematic if anyone started asking questions. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. What are you talking about? I'm talking about Harold Harriman. I'm talking about a death that was ruled natural causes when it wasn't. I'm talking about documents your father buried to protect himself and his clients. Documents that could resurface if someone, say, a retired investigator with too much time on his hands, started pulling the right threads. Patricia's throat was dry. You knew about this. I did my due diligence before I bought the building. Your father's involvement was part of the picture. I found it useful at the time, a way to ensure cooperation. You've been blackmailing me. I've been investing in you. There's a difference, but investments can be liquidated if they stop producing returns. She understood then what kind of man she'd been working for. The kind who bought leverage the way other people bought insurance. The kind who always had an exit strategy, even if it meant burning everyone else on the way out. What do you want me to do? I want you to make Mrs. Marsh disappear. Not literally, I'm not a monster, but legally, financially, socially. Find the pressure points, her family, her health, her history. There's always something. And if there isn't? Desmond Keller smiled, but his eyes were cold. Then we'll have to consider more creative solutions. Marcus Shelby was good at pulling threads. Over the next 2 weeks, he pulled every thread he could find. Old case files from his years at the Attorney General's office, public records from Marion County, property transactions going back to 1950, death certificates, probate documents, the paper trail of a building and the people who had owned it. What he found made him sick. Harold Harriman hadn't died of natural causes. He'd been murdered, poisoned most likely, though the evidence was circumstantial. The motive was money. The Glenwood Apartments in 1979 had been worth approximately $2 million, but Harriman had been planning to donate the building to a nonprofit housing trust, which would have made it untouchable by future developers. Someone hadn't wanted that to happen. William Vance, Patricia's father, had been Harriman's attorney. He'd known about the donation plans. He'd also known about Richard Marsh's lifetime deed, and he'd suppressed it, along with several other documents after Harriman's death. Why? Because William Vance had his own investors, silent partners who wanted the building to remain in private hands, partners who stood to profit from future development, partners whose names had been carefully hidden behind a maze of shell corporations and offshore trusts. But Marcus was patient, and he was thorough, and eventually he found a name that made everything else make sense. Keller. Not Desmond Keller, his father, a Chicago real estate developer named Victor Keller, who had died in 1996, leaving his son an empire built on exactly this kind of quiet corruption. Desmond Keller hadn't just bought the Glenwood Apartments. He'd inherited a claim on it, a claim that went back 50 years, to a murder that had never been solved. And Eleanor Marsh, with her husband's old notebook and her stubborn refusal to leave, was the only witness still alive. The final hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in late October. Judge Whitmore had reviewed all the documents. He'd read the expert reports on the deed. He'd examined the property records going back decades. And he'd received, 3 days before the hearing, an anonymous package containing copies of William Vance's suppressed files, along with a detailed memo explaining their significance. The package had been sent from a post office in rural Indiana, no return address, no fingerprints. When Patricia Vance arrived in the courtroom, she could tell something had changed. The judge wasn't looking at her with the usual professional neutrality. He was looking at her the way people look at someone who has been caught. "Ms. Vance," he said, before proceedings had even officially begun, I've received some troubling information regarding your firm's handling of property records related to this case. I'm going to give you one opportunity to explain." Patricia looked at her client's empty chair. Desmond Keller had, characteristically, not bothered to show up, and she made a decision. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a recess to consult with my client." Request denied. The question is simple, Counselor. Did your father, William Vance, suppress or destroy documents related to the Glenwood Apartments property transfer, including a lifetime tenancy deed granted to Richard and Eleanor Marsh in 1974? The courtroom was silent. Patricia thought about her career, 23 years of careful work, cases won, clients protected, a reputation built on precision and discretion. She thought about her father, dead now for 16 years, and all the things he'd never told her. She thought about Desmond Keller and his cold smile, and the implied threat that hung over every conversation they'd ever had. And she thought about Eleanor Marsh, sitting at the defendant's table in the same cardigan she'd worn to every hearing, looking small and tired and utterly alone. "Your Honor," Patricia said, "I was not aware of any document suppression until recently, but based on information I've reviewed in the past 48 hours, I believe there may be merit to the allegation. My firm is conducting an internal investigation, and I've personally withdrawn from this case as of this morning." The courtroom erupted. Judge Whitmore banged his gavel. Order was restored, but barely. Patricia Vance gathered her papers and walked out without looking back. She knew what came next: investigations, depositions, possibly disbarment. Her father's sins had finally found her. The hearing continued without her. Desmond Keller's remaining attorneys, younger, less experienced, clearly unprepared, tried to salvage the case. They argued that even if there had been irregularities in past transactions, their client had purchased the property in good faith. Judge Whitmore was not impressed. "Your client purchased a building with an existing encumbrance that was fraudulently concealed," he said. "That's not good faith. That's the benefit of someone else's fraud. Mrs. Marsh's lifetime tenancy is hereby confirmed. Any further attempts to remove her from the property will be treated as contempt of court." Eleanor Marsh stood up slowly. "Your Honor," she said, "I have something to say." The judge nodded. She looked around the courtroom, at the attorneys, at the observers, at the bailiffs and clerks who had watched her struggle through 3 months of hearings. "My husband kept secrets from me. I found that out the hard way. I don't know everything he did or everything he knew, but I know one thing for certain: he loved me. He loved our home, and he did what he thought he had to do to protect both." She paused, steadying herself. "I'm not here because I want revenge. I'm not here because I want money. I'm here because a man I trusted told me I could stay in my home until I died, and I believed him. That's all. I just wanted to keep a promise someone made to me 50 years ago. People keep telling me I should move on, find somewhere else, let it go. But where am I supposed to go? That apartment is everything I have left of my husband, of my daughter's childhood, of the life I built. You can't put a price on that. You can't evict someone from their own memories." She sat back down. Judge Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Marsh," he said, "you're right, some things can't be priced. This case is closed." The aftermath unfolded slowly. Desmond Keller's development project collapsed. The fraud allegations triggered investigations by the Indiana Attorney General and the SEC. His Delaware LLC was dissolved. His Chicago empire began to crumble under the weight of scrutiny he'd spent years avoiding. Patricia Vance cooperated with investigators. She turned over everything she'd found in her father's files, not to save herself, but because she was tired of carrying secrets she'd never chosen. The Bar Association suspended her license pending review, but the criminal prosecutors seemed more interested in her client than in her. Marcus Shelby was asked to consult on the expanded investigation. He agreed, partly because he wanted to see it through, and partly because retirement had never suited him anyway. And Eleanor Marsh went home. She climbed the stairs to apartment 4B. The elevator had been broken for months, and there was no one left to fix it, and she sat in her chair by the window and watched the parking lot as the sun went down. The building was empty now except for her. 47 units all vacant. The halls echoed with ghosts. She thought about Richard, about all the years they'd had together and all the years she'd had alone, about the secrets he'd kept and the price he'd paid to keep them. She thought about Harold Harriman, dying in his office 50 years ago, and whatever her husband had seen or done that night. She thought about the fact that she would never really know. That was the hardest part. Not the fear, not the fighting, not the months of uncertainty. The hardest part was accepting that some questions don't get answered, that some truths stay buried, that you can win a battle and still lose pieces of yourself you didn't know were at stake. She opened the notebook again. The final entry was dated December 15, 1979, 3 weeks after Harold Harriman's death. Richard's handwriting was shakier than usual, as if he'd been writing in the dark or in a hurry. I did what I had to do. I hope she never finds out. I hope she stays safe. I hope she gets to die in her own home the way she deserves. If anyone reads this after I'm gone, know that I loved her more than I loved the truth. That might be a sin, but it's my sin, not hers. Let her rest. Eleanor closed the notebook. She didn't cry. She'd done enough crying over the past 3 months to last the rest of her life. Instead, she looked out the window at the empty parking lot, at the city lights coming on in the distance, at the sky turning purple and then black. She was still here. That would have to be enough. Marcus Shelby came to see her one last time, a week before Christmas. He brought groceries and a bottle of wine and a folder he said she didn't have to open if she didn't want to. She opened it anyway. Inside was a photograph. Color this time, not black and white. It showed a woman in a hospital gown holding a newborn baby. The woman was smiling. The baby was asleep. I found this in the case file, Marcus said. I don't know why it was there, but I thought you should have it. Eleanor stared at the photograph. The woman was her. The baby was her daughter, born in 1962, a year after she and Richard had moved into the apartment. She'd never seen this picture before. Where did you find this? In Harold Harriman's personal effects, the things that were recovered from his office after he died. Why would he have a picture of my daughter? Marcus shook his head. I don't know, maybe your husband gave it to him. Maybe it meant something. Maybe it was just a reminder. A reminder of what? That some things are worth protecting. Eleanor looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she placed it on the table beside her chair, next to the notebook and the deed, and all the other pieces of a life she was still trying to understand. Thank you, she said. Marcus nodded and let himself out. She sat alone in the quiet apartment, listening to the building settle around her. The old radiators clanking, the floorboards creaking, the sounds of a place that had been home for so long she couldn't imagine existing anywhere else. She thought about what Marcus had said. Some things are worth protecting. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe that was what Richard had been trying to tell her all along. Not the details, not who or what or how, but the reason. The simple, human reason that explained everything and nothing at the same time. Love. Not the kind that shows up in greeting cards or movie endings. The messy kind. The kind that makes you do things you can't explain. The kind that leaves marks you can't erase. She picked up the photograph again. Her daughter had died in 2019. Cancer. They'd been estranged for years before that, an old argument about something neither of them could remember clearly, the kind of fight that grows larger the longer you refuse to address it. Eleanor had wanted to reconcile. She just never found the right words. And then it was too late, the way it always is, the way it will always be. But here was the baby, here was the beginning. Here was proof that something beautiful had existed in this apartment once. Eleanor Marsh sat in the dark, holding a photograph of a life she could never get back, in a building that was slowly falling apart around her. And she stayed, because that was the only thing left to do. Because Richard had asked her to. Because sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to keep living in the spaces they left behind. The building would be condemned eventually. The city would step in. Someone would decide that an old woman alone in an empty apartment complex was a safety hazard or a liability or just an inconvenience. But not tonight. Tonight she was home, and the judge had said she could stay.